Okay, so digitizing in ArcPro, I think, is actually a lot better than the methods used in ArcMap. So I'm actually a big fan of drawing and editing in ArcPro. So first off, if you want to begin to edit, you're going to have to create a layer. That can be done within ArcMap using the Create Feature Class tool, which will generate a new feature class. If it's stored outside of a file geodatabase, then it's going to be a shapefile. So again, you can still edit and create feature classes and shapefiles. Since again, ArcGIS Pro is tab-based, you'll access the editing tools under the Edit tab. Currently, there's not really a default editing mode. Instead, once you go into the tab and click Create, then you can start to edit, and then when you save, your edits will be saved. Again, you'll just do that with the Create button, and then Save to save your edits. Similar to ArcMap, there's no auto-saving, so you need to remember to save often. So if you edit for 8 hours and never save, and then there's a crash, you've just lost that work. This is an example of the editing tab within ArcGIS Pro. So again, just to point out a few options, if you click Create, that'll allow you to start editing. You can set snapping options for things like topology. There's a selection option, because if you're going to do some editing after you draw, you need to maybe select the feature. And then once you've created things, you can do a save or a discard if you want to not save those edits. There's also a lot of access to some editing tools, so things such as editing vertices, moving objects, splitting and merging features, and there's also options for doing 3D drawing and editing 3D features. Whenever you edit, it's going to pop up a Create Features pane, and again, you'll just click on the feature you want to draw and then start drawing. You can also pull up an attributes editing window where you can edit the attributes. You could also do that within the attribute table by just simply pulling up the attribute table. Similar to ArcMap, there's a variety of different geometric fields that can be added based on the geometry of the features that you're creating. So for point features, you can calculate X and Y coordinates. If you can Z-enable the data and store Z coordinates or elevational coordinates, and if you're interested in like positions along a network, you can incorporate M coordinates. For lines, you can calculate the start, end, and mid X and Y coordinates relative to the map projection. You can also calculate the length of a line feature and the bearing or direction of the line feature. For polygons, you can generate the area, the perimeter, basically the length along the edge, and also the centroid X and Y coordinates. And that can all be accomplished with the Add Geometry Attributes tool. For adding fields, you can define a wide variety of types, similar to ArcMap. So if you're storing whole number integer values, you can define a field as a short or long integer. If you're interested in storing decimal places, you can use float or double. Text, it will be text or characters, or numeric data that's actually being treated as text as opposed to numbers, and also date fields. One thing that's kind of new in ArcPro versus ArcMap is whenever you want to create a new field, you can pull up an attribute table, or basically a table that transposes the attribute table. So it allows you to see the list of columns and their characteristics as opposed to all of the rows of data. And this is showing a screen capture from that. So here I'm adding a field called name, and I'm defining it as text. Also, there are options for making a field visible or not, so you may have some fields that you don't want an editor to see or just don't want to have in the way if you want to make the table look more clean. You can also define a field as read-only, so if you don't want it to be edited, for example. If you want a cleaner or more readable name, you can also specify an alias. And then there's some other options. So if for numeric data, you can define the number format. If it's going to be float or double, you could specify like a precision or whatnot, and if for text fields, you can specify a length of characters that can be stored in that field. It's also possible to incorporate scale into your layers in ArcGIS Pro, and if you end up making a web map out of this, those visibility scales should be honored. So if you click on a layer in the content pane, you should be able to open up the properties, layer properties, and then set a scale under this general tab or options here. So you can set a scale at which it will not be viewable if you zoom in too far, or a scale that it will not be viewable if you zoom too far out. So this can be used to control generalization and display data as you change the scale of your map. So that can be done on a layer by layer basis. It's also possible to define time-enabled data if there's some time information associated with your data. As an example, I pulled in this Naval Oceanographic Office data, which is, I guess this is water temperatures from the Living Atlas, and this data was already time-enabled, so I was able to pull up this bar and I could display changes in the data over time. So if you have information within your data set to support that, then you can define that within the layer properties. So here underneath of this time options, we can set a time extent that it covers, how fast it moves, and what field we're using to actually denote the time information.